Delay after delay has marked Belgium's promise to deliver F-16s to Ukraine. Every time those vital fighter jets seem to be on the verge of reaching the country that needs them the most, they're pulled back. Belgium has had its reasons, but for Ukraine, each delay means another shot delivered to its effort to defend itself against Russian aggression. But Belgium had finally had enough. It's sending Ukraine what Vladimir Putin fears most in record numbers, transforming Ukraine into an aerial powerhouse in the process. On August 26, Euromaidan Press reported that Belgium is finally on the verge of joining the coalition of European countries that have delivered F-16s to Ukraine. It's always been part of that coalition, of course. However, constant delays, which will be explained in a moment, have meant that Belgium's promise of F-16s has always been precisely that, a promise which it hasn't followed through. Until now. Belgium has finally given a timeline to Ukraine, with a timeline for when it can expect to receive its F-16s, with the first batch of a record-breaking 30 to be delivered within the next few months. It'll take a little longer to deliver all of the jets. Ukraine should have all 30 of Belgium's F-16s by 2028, the country says. That's more than any other donor has delivered or promised, and the full total of 30 could be a game changer for Ukraine. The confirmation that the first Belgian F-16s are arriving in the coming months comes from Belgian Foreign Minister Maxime Prévot, who made the claim during a joint press briefing in Odesa on August 26. Sadly, not much more is known than that. Prévot didn't explain how many F-16s will be in this first batch or precisely which month they'll arrive. But it's now known for certain that they'll be landing in Ukraine before the end of December, meaning Ukraine only has to wait a maximum of 4 months to get its hands on jets it's been waiting to use for a long time. For Ukraine, it's about time. These jets have been delayed for far too long, though Belgium will argue that it had a good reason to hold back. As the United 24 media explained back in February, Belgium would have sent its F-16s to Ukraine by now, were it not for another delay affecting its ability to do so. Belgium has been awaiting the arrival of a batch of US-made F-35A fighter jets, which are supposed to serve as direct replacements for the F-16s that it's going to send to Ukraine. Those F-35As haven't arrived yet. Efforts were made to get the first batch of these more advanced jets to Belgium by the end of 2024, United 24 explained. Those efforts failed. Belgium was left to make the difficult decision to keep hold of its F-16s for the sake of its own air force. From a logical and military standpoint, this makes sense. Losing all of its F-16s without first having suitable replacements would leave Belgium vulnerable in the skies. Realistically, this likely wouldn't have mattered. As a member of NATO, Belgium is surrounded by countries that would come to its aid if an aggressor, such as Russia, tried to take advantage of its lack of fighter jets. Still, Belgium didn't want to take the chance. The decision was made: no F-16s to Ukraine until F-35As land in Belgium. Now, Ukraine's new F-16s are mere months away, which also reveals that Belgium is expecting to receive its F-35As very soon. The first F-35A delivery is expected sometime during the fall, Defense News reported back in June, so it can be assumed that will trigger the first batch of F-16s to head into Ukraine. It can also be assumed that Belgium will go like for like with its transfers. It's ordered 34 F-35As from the US, all to be delivered over the next few years. When one F-35A arrives, an F-16 goes out to Ukraine. Again, it's all logical. But for Ukraine, having to wait so long has been like a dagger in its side. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky subtly made that point on August 22. That's when Caliber reported on comments Zelensky made during a joint press conference held with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. I'll explain how complicated it is with one example. When we talk about aircraft, F-16s, Zelensky said, "We're very grateful to all our partners for the coordination and for the fact that we have this kind of air fleet, or at least the beginning of one. We don't have all the aircraft we need. These aircraft are not enough to guarantee our security in the sky." Zelensky was speaking in the context of potential security guarantees being provided to Ukraine, and he didn't mention how many F-16s he believes his country needs to secure its skies. Nevertheless, the message was loud and clear. Ukraine needs what was promised to it as soon as possible. It appears that Belgium has picked up on that message, which is why it's provided a clearer delivery date for its first batch of F-16s. Ukraine will make very good use of these jets when they arrive. Ukraine received the first of its F-16s from its European partners back in August 2024 and immediately put them to work in a defensive role. Within days of the arrival of those jets, they were in the skies and shooting down incoming Russian cruise missiles. The first reported instance of these interception operations came toward at the end of August, when the F-16s were deployed to tackle a Russian aerial volley containing dozens of missiles and drones. Some of those weapons got through, destroying a hotel, homes and residential buildings and killing at least 5 people, Defense News reported at the time. However, the F-16s had mitigated the damage and would continue to serve in a similar role in the months that followed. By January, it was clear that Ukraine's pilots had fully adapted to their new Western aerial platforms. In that month, the Kyiv Independent reported on a Ukrainian F-16 pilot achieving something that no other pilot of this fearsome fighter jet has managed to do. In a single mission, that pilot managed to shoot down 6 cruise missiles, with the last 2 being taken out using the F-16's cannons. Ukraine's pilots were getting better, and as more F-16s started arriving in the country, Ukraine began using them for more than just defense. By April, US Army General Christopher G. Cavoli was telling the Senate Armed Services Committee that Ukraine was going on the attack with its F-16s. They fly every day, they've defeated large number of cruise missile threats, and they've delivered an awful lot of offensive attacks as well, specifically bombing attacks in the east, Cavoli said. However, using F-16s in an attacking context brings with it some more risks. As those jets approach the front lines, they can come under fire from Russia's air defenses. Losses happen. The most recent of those losses came on July 1st, which is when Newsweek reported that Ukraine had confirmed that a third Ukrainian F-16 fighter pilot had been killed in action in 2025. That pilot managed to intercept 7 incoming aerial targets before his aircraft got hit and went down. This is where the delay in the arrival of Belgium's F-16s has really started to sting Ukraine. Each loss of one of these fighter jets reduces Ukraine's aerial power at a time when it's dealing with record-breaking Russian drone and missile attacks. Ukraine simply can't afford to lose more, at least not without knowing that replacements are inbound. Now, Ukraine knows that Belgium has set a timeline in place, and that announcement comes on the back of more good news for Ukraine. Back in May, the Netherlands completed the transfer of the 24 F-16s it had promised to Ukraine, with the last of that batch arriving in Ukraine on May 26. The Netherlands was able to speed up its deliveries in comparison to Belgium because it had already received the F-35s it needed to replace its older aerial platforms. Announcing the transfer, Dutch Defense Minister Ruben Brekelmans again made it clear why these fighter jets are so important to Ukraine. Because of the daily Russian airstrikes, the F-16s are of vital importance to Ukraine, Brekelmans said. They have already saved lives. Ultimately, that's the point. When Ukraine has a healthy supply of F-16s, it can shoot down more of Russia's missiles and drones. These jets allow it to hone in on the missiles that have the potential to cause the most damage. For instance, with every cruise missile destroyed in the skies being a missile that doesn't land on a Ukrainian city. Putin has shown that he has no issue with committing war crimes to get what he wants in the Ukraine invasion. Thousands of civilians have been killed or injured due to Russian airstrikes that target civilians instead of Ukrainian military infrastructure. Specifically, 13,883 Ukrainian civilians have been killed in Putin's war as of July 31, 2025. Another 35,548 have been injured. Ukraine's F-16s are a vital line of defense that is needed to ensure these already high numbers don't rocket up even further. Now, thanks to Belgium, Ukraine knows that more are on the way. However, The word fear was mentioned in the introduction to this video. It was also mentioned that Ukraine's F-16s are the weapon that Putin fears most out of everyone that the West is delivering, and there are good reasons for that beyond their ability to mitigate the damage being caused by his aerial offensives. Putin knows that Ukraine's F-16s, when used correctly, can have a massive impact on the battlefield. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, highlighted this potential impact in a June 2024 article, just 2 months before the first F-16s arrived in Ukraine. It provided 5 reasons why Putin should fear the F-16, 4 of which are directly relevant to the Ukraine war and the position that Ukraine now holds in global geopolitics. The first of those 4 reasons is simple. The air power the United States has developed over the years naturally strikes fear into the hearts of its enemies, and it should, as CSIS explains. A significant portion of the power of these air forces comes from the technological superiority they possess over their adversaries, in addition to the might of their combined size across the alliance. The F-16 is the most prolific Western 4th-generation fighter jet produced, with thousands still in active service and highly upgraded versions still in production. The point being made here is that not only is the F-16 more advanced than many of the Soviet-era aerial platforms Ukraine is fielding, but it being in active service means that there are plenty of resources available for Ukraine to learn how to maximize its use of the jets. In short, the F-16 is a higher quality jet than most of the fighters that Russia has to offer. That creates a psychological advantage for Ukraine, as one Ukrainian F-16 pilot revealed in March. From their actions, we can see that they are starting to retreat. They are afraid to approach us, the pilot said. After all, there is a living person sitting there too, who also doesn't want to die. He added that F-16s are ideal for tactical strikes that Russian platforms, such as the MiG-29 and Su-27, can't carry out. It's the difference between a scalpel and a sledgehammer, with that making F-16s a very dangerous asset for Ukraine to have in its arsenal. That pilot's point feeds into the second reason that Putin fears the F-16. The jet allows Ukraine to hold more Russian targets at risk, which provides Ukraine with leverage. CSIS makes the point that this increased strike capacity could come in useful during peace negotiations, as Ukraine can hold it over Russia's head. But even if that leverage isn't used for negotiating, the fact is that F-16s open up more targets, especially in Russia's rear. That could severely damage the country's push to take more Ukrainian territory. The bigger the Ukrainian F-16 fleet, the more this particular fear grows. Belgian F-16s finally arriving in Ukraine will contribute massively to this particular fear. Third on the list is what the arrival of F-16s in Ukraine means for a symbolic and integrative perspective. Giving F-16s to Ukraine is a significant step forward to further integrate the country into the US and European economic and defense ecosystem, which will increase Ukraine's strength in the long term, CSIS says. That's precisely what Putin doesn't want. It's very telling that one of the key conditions Putin has outlined, if any peace deal is to be reached with Ukraine, is that the nation can't become a NATO member. Russia's leader has also used NATO as an excuse for his invasion, essentially arguing that Russia needs to take the country and strip it of its sovereignty so that it doesn't fall under the sway of an organization that Putin considers Russia's mortal enemy. Even after his Alaska meeting with US President Donald Trump, the no NATO demand is still being made, as is an edict that Russia won't accept a European peacekeeping force inside Ukraine as part of a peace deal. This is fear in its basest form. Putin is terrified of Ukraine integrating deeper into Western culture because he knows that integration spells the end of any influence Russia has within the country. Of course, F-16s arriving in Ukraine don't complete that integration. Far from it. However, they are a microcosm of what Putin fears. These are NATO jets. Ukraine's pilots have been trained to use them by NATO forces, and it's NATO missiles that are being fired from these jets. The great irony here is that what may be Putin's greatest fear is being realized as a result of the war he started. And then there's the most immediate fear. F-16s take Ukraine a step closer to achieving air superiority, or at least pockets of it inside Ukraine. The tempo of ground operations is forced to change when a country controls the skies over the battlefield, CSIS points out. And Russia has utterly failed to maintain the aerial dominance its massive air force should be able to hold over Ukraine. This is a country that has 4,292 aircraft in its air force, 833 of which are fighter jets, according to Global Firepower. The skies shouldn't be a problem for Russia, but they are. Its aircraft have been reduced to firing on Ukraine behind the front lines due to how effective Ukraine has been taking them down when they venture further. With more F-16s, Ukraine could take control of the skies that Russia has failed to dominate, placing Putin's troops on the front lines at enormous risk. Combined aerial and ground assaults can stop those troops in their tracks. Any momentum Putin would hope to use as leverage in peace negotiations wilts. As CSIS puts it, such localized air superiority would be coordinated with Ukrainian land defensives to support a breakthrough operation and would be most effective with combined arms operations. Giving F-16s to Ukraine is an essential move toward establishing air superiority. The caveat to all of this is the numbers. Ukraine hasn't been able to fully force Putin to face these fears because it simply doesn't have enough F-16s to make it happen. Belgium, however unwillingly, was one of the reasons for that. Its constant delays as it awaited deliveries of F-35s had the knock-on effect of essentially forcing Ukraine to fight with one arm tied behind its back on the F-16 front. As Belgian F-16s finally start arriving in Ukraine, that arm becomes free, and the great fears CSIS highlights could become realities for Putin. Belgium has finally had enough of hanging around, and Russia is going to suffer as a result. And there's more for Putin to fear beyond the arrival of Belgian F-16s into Ukraine. During the same press conference, in which he confirmed that those jets are arriving in the coming months, Prévot affirmed that Belgium is also prepared to take part in any peacekeeping mission that Europe arranges once the war ends. I will discuss this within the government, and especially with my colleague, the Minister of Defense, to determine what military support we can provide, but we're prepared to be involved in such peacekeeping forces when it becomes necessary, Prévot said. This flies in the face of one of Putin's biggest demands for a future peace deal. It's Belgium telling Russia that it doesn't care that Putin wants no European or NATO peacekeepers in Ukraine. They'll be coming, whether he likes it or not. Subtly, this is also a sign that Belgium is sticking with Ukraine until the end of the war, regardless of whether that end comes via a peace deal or a military victory. This, along with the F-16 commitment, is a signal from Belgium that it believes Ukraine can win this war. As if to reinforce that, Prévot also confirmed that Belgium is and will be taking part in initiatives that support Ukraine's future. The Belgian foreign minister pointed out in the press conference that Belgium has already trained more than 3,000 Ukrainian soldiers, pilots and technicians. It will likely train more. He also pointed out that the country has committed over $23 million to the Ukraine Grain Initiative. Under this initiative, countries buy grain from Ukraine that they then provide to third world countries. Ukraine continues to make money from one of its most valuable exports, mitigating Russia's attempt to stop its sales, and that money ends up being spent on its defense. Prévot also added that Belgium plans to take part in the demining of the Black Sea, and it set a completion date of 2029 for that demining to happen. This is one of the underreported aspects of the Ukraine war. According to the new Voice of Ukraine, there were around 400 mines in the Black Sea as of November 2024, with estimates at the time suggesting it might take 5 years to clear them all. These mines are an obvious hazard during wartime. However, there'll also be a problem when the war ends, given the Black Sea status as a transitional waterway that allows Ukraine to ship its exports to the rest of the world. Demining is needed to secure Ukraine's future after the war. Belgium's commitment to carrying it out is another signal being sent to Putin that it believes Russia will fail to destroy Ukraine. The overall message here is that Belgium is fully committed to Ukraine, both in the present and the future. Finally, after far too many delays, Belgian F-16s are going to start arriving in Ukraine. Putin should be scared. Those jets may just tip the balance of the aerial battle in Ukraine's favor. Now, Putin has far more problems than Ukraine receiving more F-16s too. He's essentially failed in his mission to take Sumy by the end of the summer. Ukraine just delivered the final blow to that ambition by hitting a top Russian general, causing the entire Sumy front line to collapse. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more videos covering Ukraine's F-16s.